Rome, 73 BC. Beneath the shadow of the great Colosseum, Valeria Maxima stood before the wooden gate of a modest villa, her patrician hands clutching a proposition no sane man would accept. Inside lived Titus Severus, once Rome's greatest gladiator, now a broken legend who hadn't touched steel in a decade. They were separated by blood, class, and law, a nobleman's daughter and a scarred warrior who'd earned his freedom but never respect. Her family name lay in ruins, her inheritance locked behind a spectacle of blood she couldn't provide alone. She needed his sword. He needed nothing she offered, until she whispered words that changed everything. A dangerous promise, an impossible future. Will the man who swore never to kill again risk everything for a woman who offers what Rome says he cannot have? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the faded silk curtains of the Maxima Domus, once a proud estate that had housed 3 generations of Rome's political elite. Valeria stood at her bedroom window, watching servants prepare the atrium for yet another visit from her father's lawyers. The family seal, a lion rampant on a field of laurels, hung slightly askew above the impluvium, its gold leaf chipping at the edges. Like everything else in the house, it needed attention they could no longer afford. "Domina, your blue stola has been pressed," Demetria said, entering with quiet efficiency. The Greek woman had been with their household since before Valeria's birth, outlasting 2 marriages and witnessing the family's slow decline. "Marcus Tullius will arrive within the hour." "Thank you, Demetria." Valeria turned from the window. "Has there been any word from Septimus? Your cousin sent a messenger last night. He offers his deepest sympathies and assistance in these difficult times." Demetria's tone conveyed exactly what she thought of Septimus's sincerity. Valeria allowed herself a tight smile. No doubt he's already measuring the atrium for new statues. As Demetria helped her dress, Valeria's mind drifted to the task ahead. 3 months since her father's funeral, and still the vultures circled. Senator Gaius Maximus had been a complicated man, respected in the Senate, feared in business, and distant as a father. But he had been her last protection in a city that valued women primarily as vessels for alliance and progeny. "Marcus Tullius awaits in the tablinum, Domina," announced a young slave from the doorway. The family lawyer rose as she entered, his advanced age evident in the careful way he straightened his toga. "Valeria Maxima," he greeted her formally, though he had bounced her on his knee as a child. "I bring mixed news regarding your father's estate." They settled on opposite sides of her father's desk, still covered with correspondence he would never complete. The family seal sat prominently in its wooden box, the wax beside it hardened with disuse. "The will remains contested," Marcus began without preamble. "Your cousin Septimus continues to petition the praetor, claiming that as the last male Maximus, the estate should pass to him regardless of your father's written wishes." "On what grounds?" Valeria kept her voice steady. "My father's intentions were clear." "Indeed, but there is a complication." Marcus unrolled a scroll bearing her father's seal. "Your inheritance is conditional upon fulfilling a final obligation, sponsoring a gladiatorial munus in his honor, specifically during the upcoming Games of Apollo." Valeria felt her carefully constructed composure waver. A gladiatorial spectacle? That would cost nearly half the liquid assets of the estate, Marcus confirmed. "Your father believed such a public display would secure the family's reputation and your position. Without it, Septimus has legal grounds to challenge." The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. Her cousin knew of this condition. He had been counting on her inability to fulfill it. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The games are only 2 months away. Most quality gladiators are already contracted. Septimus has been quietly securing commitments from Lanisti throughout the city." Valeria's fingers traced the edge of the family seal. Her father had taught her that in Rome, everything was negotiable, for those with either gold or leverage. "There is one option," she said after a long silence. "A fighter not contracted to any ludus. One whose name alone would make the games memorable." Marcus frowned. "You cannot mean Titus Severus." He hasn't fought in 10 years. I know. Valeria stood, a plan forming. But he lives less than a day's ride from Rome. And unlike the others, he has no master to pay, no lanista to bribe. Valeria, Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. The man was granted the rudis by Sulla himself. He's free. No one can compel him to fight again. I don't intend to compel him, she replied, lifting the family seal from its box. I intend to offer him something no one else can. As she pressed the seal into warm wax on a letter of introduction, Valeria knew she was committing to a dangerous path. Roman society had rigid boundaries that separated patrician women from former slaves, no matter how famous. But those same boundaries had failed to protect her father from political enemies or her family from financial ruin. Send this with our fastest messenger, she instructed Demetria. And prepare my traveling clothes. If Titus Severus won't come to us, I shall go to him. Dawn broke over the hills outside Rome as Titus Severus completed his 500th sword strike, sweat glistening on his scarred torso despite the morning chill. The wooden rudis in his hand, symbol of his freedom, granted by Sulla himself after his 100th victory, cut through the air with precision that belied his 45 years. He trained not for glory or survival now, but from habit formed through decades when each morning's practice determined whether he would live to see evening. Still fighting ghosts, old friend? Quintus emerged from the modest villa, carrying a pitcher of watered wine. The Numidian had once been a retiarius, deadly with net and trident, before a leg injury ended his arena days. Now he managed Titus's small estate and kept his former comrade connected to the world beyond these walls. Titus lowered the wooden sword, his breathing controlled. Better ghosts than men. The ghosts don't bleed. A flash of understanding passed between them, the shared nightmares, the remembered roar of crowds demanding death, the faces of fallen opponents. 10 years free, and still the arena haunted them both. The boys will arrive soon for their lessons, Quintus said, changing the subject as he always did when memories threatened to darken the day. And a messenger came before dawn. Roman, well-dressed. Left this. He held out a sealed letter bearing an aristocratic crest. Titus took it with a frown. The Maxima family seal. What business would they have with me? Perhaps they want their son taught to fight properly, not that mincing style they learned from Greek tutors. Quintus grinned, but his eyes remained watchful. Titus broke the seal and scanned the formal Latin script. His expression hardened with each line. They want me to fight, he said finally. At the games of Apollo. Quintus cursed softly. After 10 years? Since this. Some young fool of an aedile looking to make his name. Valeria Maxima. Titus handed him the letter. Daughter of Senator Gaius Maximus. She wishes to meet and discuss terms. Terms? Quintus laughed without humor. What terms could possibly matter? You swore an oath, Titus. Never again. The oath had been made on the sands of the arena, kneeling beside the body of a young fighter who should never have been matched against him. A boy barely 17, thrown to the legendary Thracian to satisfy a debt. Titus had granted him a clean death, then turned to the shocked audience and vowed the sands would never again be stained by his hand. I remember my oath, Titus said quietly. Send the messenger back with my refusal. Later, as he instructed local boys in basic swordsmanship, sons of farmers and merchants who saw military service in their future, Titus found his thoughts returning to the letter. The Maxima family had once been powerful patrons of the games. He had fought under their sponsorship during Sulla's time, though he had never met the senator personally. Your guard is too high, Lucius, he corrected a gangly 15-year-old. A real opponent would open your belly before you could counter. But, Magister, you said yesterday to keep our guard up, the boy protested. Too high, no. Titus positioned the boy's arm. Balance. Always balance. As the sun reached its zenith, Quintus returned from town with supplies and news. The boys departed, and the two former gladiators sat in the shade of an olive tree, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and figs. The messenger refused to take your refusal, Quintus reported. Said his instructions were to return with either you or a time when the domina might call upon you herself. Titus raised an eyebrow. She would come here? A patrician woman, to the home of a former slave. These Maximi were always dramatic. Quintus tore a piece of bread. There's more. I visited the wine shop. You know how Petrus hears everything. The old senator died 3 months ago. The daughter's inheritance is being challenged by a cousin. And there's some condition involving the games. Understanding dawned. She needs a spectacle to secure her claim. And what better spectacle than the return of the legendary Thracian? Quintus studied his friend's face. You're not considering this. Titus ran his thumb along the edge of his rudis, feeling the worn wood that represented everything he had fought for. No. But I will meet with her. Courtesy demands that much. Since when does a gladiator concern himself with courtesy to the patrician class? Quintus asked sharply. Titus stood, looking toward Rome in the distance. Since I decided to live as more than what they made me. The Temple of Fortuna Minor stood in a quiet corner of the forum, less grand than its counterparts but fitting for a meeting that straddled the line between propriety and scandal. Valeria arrived with only Demetria as companion. Enough presence to maintain decorum, not enough to draw attention. She carried a bronze model of the Circus Maximus, small enough to fit in her hands but detailed down to the seating arrangements and sand pathways. He may not come, Demetria murmured, adjusting Valeria's stola to better cover her shoulders. He will. Valeria spoke with more confidence than she felt. His reputation speaks of honor, not just skill. When Titus entered the temple, several worshippers turned to stare. Despite simple attire, he carried himself with the unmistakable presence of an arena champion. The legendary scar that ran from right temple to jaw, received in his final professional fight, caught the sunlight filtering through the temple columns. Domina Maxima. He bowed, correct in form but lacking the obsequiousness of most freedmen addressing patricians. You wish to speak with me? Gratitude for agreeing to meet Titus Severus. She gestured to a stone bench partially concealed behind a column. Shall we discuss privately? Once seated, separated by a proper distance with Demetria standing watchfully nearby, Valeria placed the bronze arena model between them. Do you know why I've sought you out? Your messenger was clear about the request, though not the reason. His voice remained neutral. You wish me to fight in the games of Apollo. One fight, she clarified. A single contest against an opponent of your choosing. Why me? The question was direct, his gaze steady. Rome has no shortage of gladiators seeking glory and gold. Valeria had rehearsed this conversation, but found her prepared speeches inadequate before his straightforward manner. Because your name alone would make the games memorable. Because a contest featuring the legendary Thracian would overshadow any spectacle my cousin could arrange. So this is about family politics. His expression revealed nothing. It's about survival. She lowered her voice. My father's will requires I sponsor games in his honor to secure my inheritance. My cousin Septimus has arranged to make this impossible, bribing Lanisti throughout Rome to withhold their fighters. Without a spectacular centerpiece, the games will fail, and with them, my father's legacy and my future. Titus studied the bronze model, running a calloused finger along its miniature stands. I made a vow, Domina. 10 years ago, I swore never to spill blood for entertainment again. I'm not asking you to kill, Valeria countered. Only to fight. To win. The decision of mercy would be yours. And what do you offer that would make me break an oath 10 years kept? There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Valeria had considered wealth, of course. Land, perhaps, or political connections. But instinct told her such offerings would mean little to this man. Legal sponsorship, she said instead. For full citizenship and marriage rights. His eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his composed demeanor. What game are you playing, Domina? A patrician woman cannot sponsor a former slave for such rights. The Senate would never. The Senate has exceptions for extraordinary service to Rome or a noble house, she interrupted. My father's political allies still hold certain offices. With my inheritance secured, I would have the influence to navigate the legal process. Manumicio confirmed, connubium secured. To what end? His voice had hardened. What purpose would such rights serve me? Valeria hesitated, aware she was stepping onto dangerous ground. Freedom is more than a wooden sword, Titus Severus. True freedom includes the right to build a legacy, to have your children born free citizens of Rome. I offer you completion of what Sulla began when he granted your Rudis. Something flickered in his eyes, not hope, exactly, but a glimpse of long-buried yearning. Before he could respond, the temple's atmosphere shifted. Several men in expensive togas entered, among them faces familiar to Rome's political scene. Senator Crassus, Demetria whispered urgently. And the aedile Publius. We should continue this elsewhere, Valeria said, gathering the model. Politics has too many eyes and ears in the forum. They walked together through streets growing busy with midday commerce, an unusual pair that drew curious glances. Their conversation continued in measured tones. You haven't explained why you would use your influence for such a purpose, Titus said finally. The truth, Domina. No more political answers. Valeria stopped beside a fountain, watching water splash over carved stone. My father mentioned you in his final days. He said there was a debt unpaid. I don't know what debt, but I know he valued honor above all. This is my chance to honor his final wishes while securing my own future. And if I refuse? Then I lose everything, she answered simply. And you keep your oath. We each live with our choices. 3 days passed without word from Titus Severus. Valeria maintained her routine, meetings with Marcus Tullius, careful management of dwindling household funds, and strategic appearances at social functions where she endured pitying glances from former peers. Each morning, she checked with her doorkeeper. Each evening she retired with mounting concern. On the 4th day, a messenger arrived, not from Titus, but from her cousin Septimus. He invites you to dine, Demetria reported, holding the perfumed invitation with evident distaste, to discuss an amicable resolution to your situation. How generous, Valeria replied dryly. He wishes to negotiate the terms of my surrender. The wax tablet recording their household expenses lay before her, its figures telling a stark story. Without her inheritance, the household would remain solvent for perhaps 3 more months. After that, selling property would begin, first the country villa, then perhaps this domus itself. There is another message, Demetria added cautiously, delivered by a boy from outside the city. No seal, no signature. The second message was written on simple parchment. I will meet your terms, with conditions of my own. The old cypress grove, tomorrow at midday. Valeria's pulse quickened. Prepare my traveling clothes for tomorrow. Tell no one. The following day found her beneath ancient cypress trees, accompanied only by Demetria and a single house slave as propriety demanded. When Titus arrived, he brought an older man she didn't recognize. This is Atticus, Titus introduced him. Once Lanista of the Ludus Magnus, now my advisor in this venture. Atticus bowed with the polish of one accustomed to aristocratic patrons. Domina Maxima. You've decided to accept my proposal, Valeria said, addressing Titus directly. With conditions. He gestured, and Atticus produced a wax tablet. First, I choose my opponent from among active gladiators, not retired veterans or untrained men. Agreed, she nodded. Though my cousin has influence with many Lanisti. Second, I require proper training facilities and equipment. Not a ludus, I won't subject myself to a Lanista's authority again, but something equivalent. My family's country estate has suitable grounds, Valeria offered. Private, yet close enough to the city for necessary arrangements. Third, Titus continued, his gaze intensifying, regardless of the outcome, you will use your influence to secure the legal rights we discussed. Not just for me, but for Quintus as well. This was unexpected. Your friend from the arena? My brother in all but blood, Titus corrected. He fought beside me for 15 years. His freedom should equal mine in every respect. Valeria considered. Adding a second freedman to her petition would complicate matters, but not impossibly so. Agreed, though it may take longer to arrange both. And finally, Titus said, we require a formal contract, witnessed and sealed. What we discuss here must be legally binding. Marcus Tullius would disapprove of such documentation. The arrangement walked the edges of social propriety, but Valeria understood the necessity. A freedman's experience taught wariness of patrician promises. I can have a contract prepared by tomorrow, she said. We'll sign at my estate, where we can speak freely. Atticus stepped forward. The games are 7 weeks away. If Titus is to be ready, training must begin immediately. Then it's settled. Valeria extended her hand, a gesture between equals that visibly surprised both men. After a moment's hesitation, Titus clasped it briefly. The next day, under the watchful eyes of Marcus Tullius, they formalized their agreement. The contract tablet was etched with careful legal language that obscured the true nature of their arrangement beneath layers of traditional patronage terminology. Both signed, pressed their seals into soft wax, and became bound in a pact neither had imagined possible weeks before. The countryside will provide better privacy, Valeria explained as they toured the estate grounds. My father maintained this training area for his household guards. The space was modest compared to a professional ludus, but workable, an open courtyard with packed sand, basic equipment racks, and a covered area for inclement weather. Nearby buildings could house Titus and any training partners he required. It will serve, Titus said, testing the weight of a practice sword. I'll need to bring Quintus and perhaps 2 others. Former gladiators who can help prepare me properly. Of course, I'll arrange accommodations. As Titus practiced a few experimental strikes, Valeria watched his form, powerful despite the years away from combat, each movement precise. The legendary gladiator was still present beneath the surface of the retired man. Word will spread quickly once training begins in earnest, he warned, lowering the sword. Are you prepared for the gossip? A patrician woman housing a former slave, preparing him for combat. Let them talk, Valeria replied with more confidence than she felt. In Rome, scandal fades. Victory endures. The old gladius emerged from its oiled wrappings, steel still gleaming despite a decade of disuse. Titus balanced it in his hand, feeling the familiar weight, lighter than the wooden practice sword he'd been using, deadlier in its precision. The blade had been a gift from his lanista after his 50th victory, crafted specifically for his fighting style. Still fits your hand like it was born there, observed Quintus, who had arrived the previous day with 2 other retired gladiators, Gallius, a former Murmillo, and Drusus, who had fought as both Secutor and Dymacharis. The hand remembers, Titus agreed, executing a simple cut-thrust combination. The rest of me protests. 6 days of training had awakened muscles long dormant. Despite his daily exercises over the years, the intensity required for arena combat was another matter entirely. Each morning began before dawn with running, followed by strength work, then hours of weapons drills. By midday, his body ached in ways that reminded him of his first years in the ludus. The Thracian needs his edge back, Gallius commented, his northern accent still strong despite decades in Rome. You favor your right side too much. Old injury. Titus rotated his shoulder, feeling the familiar tightness. Final professional fight. Against Cassius the Giant, Drusus nodded. I lost good money on that bout. Never thought you'd survive that hammer of his, let alone win. I nearly didn't. Titus touched the scar on his face, a permanent reminder of how close death had come that day. They continued training as the sun climbed higher, working through standard combat sequences against different opponent types. Sweat soaked their simple tunics, and the rhythmic clack of wooden practice weapons echoed across the estate grounds. From a shaded portico, Valeria watched. She had taken to observing the morning sessions, ostensibly to monitor the investment her inheritance depended upon. In truth, she found herself fascinated by the transformation taking place before her eyes. Day by day, the retired freeman was giving way to the arena champion of legend. his movements becoming more fluid, his commands to his training partners more assured. "Water and food for the men," she instructed a household slave, noting how Titus pushed through obvious fatigue without complaint. The slave had just departed when a commotion at the main gate drew her attention. A moment later, Demetria hurried toward her. "Senator Crassus has arrived," the Greek woman reported, her expression concerned. "With an escort. He insists on speaking with you immediately." Valeria smoothed her stola. Marcus Licinius Crassus, reputedly the wealthiest man in Rome, with political ambitions to match his fortune. His interest could be opportunity or threat, often both simultaneously. "Show him to the garden reception area," she instructed. "Offer refreshments. I'll join him shortly." To Titus and his men she called, "Continue your work. We have a visitor I must attend to." Crassus waited in the shade of a grape arbor, declining the offered wine in favor of water, a calculated gesture of simplicity from a man whose banquets were legendary. "Domina Maxima," he greeted her with perfect courtesy. "Forgive the unannounced visit. I happen to be inspecting a property nearby." "Senator Crassus, you honor my humble estate." The political dance began with formulaic pleasantries, each assessing the other. "Not so humble, I think. Your father always had excellent taste in land." Crassus gestured toward the distant training ground. "And now you've acquired another valuable asset. Titus Severus returns to the arena after a decade, quite the spectacle for your father's memorial games." News traveled quickly in Rome, especially when wealthy men paid for information. "You seem well informed, Senator." "Information precedes opportunity," he smiled benignly. "Your cousin Septimus was quite vocal at yesterday's Senate meeting about your unconventional arrangements here." "My cousin's concern for propriety is touching," Valeria kept her tone light. "Especially given his efforts to deny me my legal inheritance." Crassus waved this away. "Family disputes are tedious affairs. I'm more interested in your Gladiator. In his prime, he was magnificent, a perfect balance of strength and skill. I witnessed his final professional fight, you know. The crowd would have rioted had Sulla not granted him the rudis on the spot. Then you understand why his return will overshadow any other games this season." "Indeed." Crassus leaned forward slightly. "Which is why I've come to offer my support." Valeria maintained her composed expression while internally calculating the potential motives behind such an offer. Crassus rarely acted without multiple advantages in mind. "That's most generous, Senator. May I ask what form this support would take?" "Access to proper training equipment. Medical care from my personal physician. Perhaps most valuably," he paused for effect, "my influence with the aediles regarding the selection of his opponent." All valuable offerings, and all creating obligations she might not wish to incur. "And what would you expect in return for such generosity?" Crassus smiled, appreciating her directness. "Your father was a pragmatic man. I respected that. I see you share his quality." He looked toward the training grounds where Titus was now sparring with Gallius. "For now, merely the right to be associated with this remarkable return. My name alongside yours in sponsorship of the bout. Later, perhaps we might discuss further collaboration." Political alliance. That was the unspoken offer, and in Rome, such alliances often culminated in marriage arrangements. Valeria chose her words carefully. "Your offer deserves proper consideration, Senator. Might I provide my answer tomorrow?" "Of course." Crassus rose smoothly. "Rome wasn't built in a day, nor are its most valuable relationships. I look forward to your response." Demetria discovered the poison in the morning meal preparation, a fine powder mixed into the olive oil destined for the training ground. Only her habit of tasting everything before serving the household prevented disaster. The slave responsible had vanished, a recent purchase with false references. "Someone knows exactly what we're doing here," Quintus observed grimly as Valeria showed him the small vial containing the remaining poison. "And they're not bothering with subtlety." "Septimus," Titus suggested, his expression hardening. "Perhaps," Valeria replied, "though poisoning lacks his usual arrogance. He prefers public humiliation to quiet elimination. She set the vial aside. We'll need to be more cautious. All food prepared under direct supervision, no new household staff. And we should accelerate the training, Titus added. I've been favoring caution over speed, but our opponents won't grant us the luxury of a full preparation. That afternoon, a messenger arrived from Rome bearing news that confirmed their suspicions. Marcus Tullius himself came to deliver it, his aged face grave with concern. Your cousin has announced his own games, the lawyer reported as they gathered in Valeria's study. To be held 2 days before yours. He's contracted Mercurius the Gaul as his main attraction. Mercurius. Quintus exchanged a look with Titus. The champion from Pompeii? Titus nodded. 30 wins, no defeats. Young, strong, and merciless. Septimus chooses well. There's more, Marcus continued. Septimus has formally challenged the legality of your contract with Titus. He claims a patrician woman cannot enter into such an agreement without male family approval. Valeria's hands tightened on the edge of her desk. He would know. He spent years studying how to control my inheritance. Can he invalidate our agreement? Titus asked directly. Not easily, Marcus assured him. I anticipated such challenges and included provisions. But it will mean public hearings before a praetor. Scrutiny neither of you may welcome. The implications hung in the air. Public examination of their arrangement would invite scandal, regardless of the legal outcome. Valeria's reputation would suffer, perhaps irreparably in certain circles. Titus would face renewed attention to his past, his status, his motivations. We proceed as planned, Valeria decided. If Septimus wants a legal battle alongside the arena contest, he shall have both. After Marcus departed, Valeria walked the estate grounds alone, needing space to think. She found herself at the training area where Titus was working with unexpected intensity, driving himself through drills that left his tunic soaked with sweat. Your lawyer brings troubling news, he observed without pausing his practice. Nothing unexpected, she replied, watching his disciplined movements. You should consider Crassus's offer. Titus executed a complex combination against an imaginary opponent. His support would deter legal challenges and bind me to obligations I might not wish to fulfill. Valeria stepped closer, entering his peripheral vision. You push yourself too hard. Injury now would serve our enemies better than any poison. Titus lowered his sword, breathing heavily. In the ludus, we trained until exhaustion, then trained beyond it. The body learns to function through pain. This isn't the ludus, she countered. You're not a slave fighting for survival, but a free man making a choice. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, at her understanding of the distinction. Old habits endure. The discipline of the arena never truly leaves. Nor should it, Valeria agreed. But wisdom must temper strength. Rest tonight. Tomorrow brings its own challenges. As twilight approached, Quintus sought her out, finding her in the small household shrine where she had been making offerings to Fortuna. A word, Domina, if I may speak freely. Of course, Quintus. The former gladiator seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. Titus has not fought for 10 years. He trains well, his skill remains, but arena combat requires more than technique. It demands a particular mindset, a willingness to do whatever necessary to survive. You doubt his resolve? I doubt his willingness to become again what once he was. The arena changed him as it changed all of us. His oath to never spill blood again, it wasn't made lightly. Valeria considered this. What are you suggesting? That you understand what you're asking of him. Not just physical risk, but something deeper. To step back into the arena is to confront the man he fought so hard to leave behind. Later that evening, unable to sleep, Valeria found Titus sitting alone in the garden, staring at the stars. Without speaking, she sat beside him, maintaining a proper distance but close enough for private conversation. Quintus worries for you, she said after a comfortable silence. Quintus always worries, Titus replied with a faint smile. It's how he survived 20 years in the arena, perpetual concern. He believes returning to the arena requires you to become someone you've fought to leave behind. Titus turned to study her face in the moonlight. And what do you believe, Valeria Maxima? The use of her first name, the first time he had addressed her so informally, did not escape her notice. I believe we all contain different selves, shaped by circumstance. The question isn't whether you can become that man again, but whether you wish to. Wisdom from a patrician woman who has never faced death for another's entertainment? No, she said quietly. Wisdom from a daughter who watched her father become someone else with each political necessity, until the man I knew existed only in private moments. We all wear masks when required. Crassus's banquet invitation arrived gilded at the edges, the subtle ostentation typical of Rome's wealthiest man. The elegant script requested Valeria's presence, and specified Titus should accompany her as her personal guest. The unusual request would raise eyebrows among Rome's elite, precisely as Crassus intended. A test, Valeria mused, showing the invitation to Marcus Tullius. He wants to see how society reacts to us together before committing his support publicly. Or a trap, the lawyer countered, exposing you to ridicule among your peers, weakening your position before the praetor's hearing. Either possibility seemed plausible. Crassus played political games with the same strategic brilliance that had built his fortune. We must attend regardless, Valeria decided. Declining would show weakness. The journey to Rome the following evening was tense. Valeria had chosen a conservative stola in deep blue, appropriate for a woman in mourning yet still befitting her station. Titus wore a simple but well-cut tunic that Marcus had arranged, the quality of its fabric suggesting a freedman of means rather than a former arena fighter. Remember, Valeria advised as their carriage approached Crassus's palatial domus, many will know your face but expect the gladiator from legend. Let them see instead the dignified citizen you've become. And you, Titus replied, remember that regardless of their whispers, you enter as the daughter of Senator Maximus. Your blood and bearing exceed most of theirs. His unexpected encouragement steadied her. Together they passed beneath Crassus's imposing marble portico, where a nomenclator announced them to the gathered guests, Valeria Maxima and her client, Titus Severus. The strategic word choice, client rather than guest or companion, established a traditional patronage relationship, technically acceptable even between a woman and a former slave. Still, conversations paused as heads turned to observe them. A silver-haired matron whispered too loudly to her companion, Gaius Maximus would roll in his tomb. His daughter, consorting with Arena, refuse. Valeria felt Titus stiffen beside her but maintained her composure, nodding graciously to those who acknowledged them. Crassus approached immediately, his timing calculated to demonstrate support before the whispers could build. Domina Maxima, welcome. He took her hands in greeting. And Titus Severus, Rome, still remembers your victories. Some of my guests fought bitterly for tickets to your final bout. With this simple exchange, Crassus established the tone. Titus was to be treated as a celebrated figure, not merely a former slave. The room adjusted accordingly, though the undercurrent of disapproval remained palpable among the more conservative patricians. Dinner followed Roman tradition, men reclined on couches, women seated upright, all arranged according to status. Valeria found herself placed near Crassus at the head of the arrangement, while Titus was positioned among minor officials and successful merchants, respectable but not among the senatorial elite. Throughout the meal, Valeria navigated conversation with practiced ease, discussing literature with a respected poet, trade with a merchant's wife, and carefully avoiding political topics that might reveal her alliances. All while maintaining awareness of Titus across the room, who seemed to be holding his own with surprising diplomacy. Your gladiator conducts himself well, observed Julia Tertia, daughter of a prominent equestrian family and Valeria's childhood friend. One would hardly guess his origins. Titus Severus earned his freedom through intelligence as much as combat skill, Valeria replied evenly. The arena merely showcased one aspect of his character. Julia leaned closer, lowering her voice. Be careful, Valeria. Already they say you seek to make him more than a client. Septimus spreads tales of impropriety at your country estate. Septimus spreads whatever serves his ambition. Perhaps, but Julia hesitated. Your father's memory deserves better protection. The barb struck deeper than Julia likely intended. Before Valeria could respond, a commotion erupted near Titus's position. A young patrician, flushed with wine, had risen to his feet and was speaking loudly. Come now, Gladiator. Surely you remember how to entertain your betters. Show us the famous Thracian strike that split 3 men in the arena. The room quieted as all eyes turned to Titus, who remained seated, his expression controlled. I no longer perform for entertainment, he replied with quiet dignity. Those days ended with my freedom. Freedom? The young man laughed. A wooden sword doesn't change what you are. My father owned 10 like you. Valeria began to rise, but Crassus's hand on her arm stopped her. Watch, he murmured. How a man responds to provocation reveals his true nature. Titus stood slowly, his movements deliberate. The young patrician stepped back involuntarily, sudden uncertainty crossing his face as he confronted the physical reality of the former champion. Your father, Titus said calmly, would have taught you better manners. A Roman of true breeding understands that dignity isn't inherited with a name, but earned through conduct. He turned to Crassus. My apologies for the disruption, Senator. Perhaps it's best I take my leave. Nonsense, Crassus replied loudly enough for all to hear. The disruption came from one who forgets that Rome's greatness lies in merit, not merely birth. We recognize worth wherever we find it, in the Senate or the arena. The rebuke was clear. The young patrician retreated in embarrassment, and conversation gradually resumed. But the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Many guests now viewed Titus with newfound curiosity, and Valeria with speculative interest. As their carriage returned to the country estate after Crassus's banquet, Valeria found herself studying Titus in the dim lantern light. The event had revealed dimensions of him she hadn't anticipated. His composure among Rome's elite, his knowledge of proper etiquette, even his conversational abilities. You surprised many tonight, she observed. Including me. Did you expect me to eat with my hands and challenge guests to combat? There was dry humor in his voice, not offense. I expected discomfort, perhaps resentment. Not the ease with which you navigated a patrician gathering. Titus gazed out at the passing countryside. In my final years as a gladiator, I was often invited to noble houses, as entertainment, of course, but present nonetheless. I observed. I learned. To what purpose? You must have known such circles would never truly accept you. To survive, he said simply. Knowledge is protection. The more I understood about those who controlled my fate, the better I could navigate their world. The carriage hit a rough patch of road, momentarily throwing them closer together before propriety could reassert distance. In that brief closeness, Valeria caught the lingering scent of cedar oil from his freshly trimmed beard, saw the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of both hardship and unexpected humor. Crassus has offered formal sponsorship, she said, changing the subject. His messenger delivered the documents tonight before we departed. And you'll accept? His protection would be valuable, especially against Septimus. She hesitated. But Crassus never gives without expecting more in return. What does he want from you? Alliance, for now. Later, perhaps marriage into his extended family, a nephew or cousin who needs a connection to old patrician lines. Titus's expression remained carefully neutral. A practical arrangement. Yes, Valeria agreed, surprised by her own reluctance to consider it. Practical. The following morning, they discovered a Senate clerk awaiting them. He bore an official ledger, a record of recent votes concerning the upcoming games. From Magistrate Porcius, the clerk explained nervously. He believed you should see this before the praetor's hearing tomorrow. Marcus Tullius examined the document with growing concern. Bribes, he concluded, carefully disguised as loans and property transactions, but unmistakable to experienced eyes. Septimus has been paying officials to influence every aspect of the games. Including your opponent's selection, the clerk added, pointing to a specific entry. The aedile has already designated who will face Titus Severus in combat. Who? Titus asked sharply. A fighter called Corvus. Recently arrived from Sicily, reportedly undefeated. Quintus cursed under his breath. I've heard whispers. Not a trained gladiator but an assassin who uses the arena for public killings. Septimus doesn't want competition, he wants Titus eliminated. Valeria turned to the clerk. Why risk bringing us this information? Magistrate Porcius served with your father in the social war. He says this repays an old debt. The clerk gathered his cloak. I should return before my absence is noted. After he departed, they gathered in Valeria's study to assess this new information. The evidence of corruption could help their case before the praetor, but using it meant exposing Porcius as their source, potentially destroying a valuable ally. We need to meet with a magistrate I trust, Valeria decided. Tonight, in the city. Discreetly. I'll accompany you, Titus said. Too risky, Marcus countered. If you're seen together in Rome after Crassus's banquet, it will only fuel Septimus's claims of impropriety. I won't send her unprotected when we know Septimus has hired assassins, Titus insisted. Their argument was interrupted by Demetria's arrival. Forgive the intrusion, Domina, but I've found something you should see. She held out a small scroll case. Hidden in your father's old study desk, in a secret compartment. The scroll contained a codicil to Senator Maximus's will, apparently never filed with the official records. Its contents were brief but shocking. An acknowledgement of debt to the Thracian gladiator who fought under my sponsorship in the year of Sulla's triumph, and instructions for his daughter to make reparations. This explains why he specified you in particular, Marcus said to Titus. But what debt could a senator owe a gladiator? Titus looked troubled. I fought many times under Maximus' family sponsorship. Your father was a regular patron of the ludus, but I never met him personally. There must be more to the story, Valeria said, carefully resealing the document. But this strengthens our position legally. It establishes a pre-existing relationship that justifies our arrangement. As preparations were made for their journey to Rome, Titus took advantage of the remaining daylight to train, pushing himself with unusual intensity. Valeria found him later at the small fountain in the garden, washing blood from scraped knuckles. We leave for the city in an hour, she informed him, then noticed his injury. You're bleeding. It's nothing. He flexed his hand dismissively. You're driving yourself too hard. She offered him a cloth for his hand. Corvus is a concern, but... It's not Corvus, Titus interrupted. It's this. He gestured vaguely between them. Whatever this is becoming. It complicates everything. The unspoken sentiment hung in the air between them, the growing awareness that their arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated, something dangerous in its potential. We should focus on the legal hearing tomorrow, Valeria said finally. One battle at a time. As you wish, Domina. Titus withdrew behind formality, the brief moment of candor already fading. Valeria found herself oddly disappointed by his retreat. Valeria, she corrected quietly. When we're alone, at least, let us use our names without titles between us. Rome's forum bustled with midday activity as Valeria emerged from the praetor's hearing, Marcus Tullius at her side. The morning had been exhausting, legal arguments, character witnesses, and Septimus's theatrical objections to her arrangement with Titus. A partial victory, Marcus assessed as they descended the marble steps. The praetor upholds our contract's validity but requires additional documentation of your father's debt to Titus before approving the citizenship petition. Documentation we don't have, Valeria noted with frustration. Unless Titus remembers something specific about his service under my father's sponsorship. They had agreed Titus would remain at the estate during the hearing to avoid inflaming the situation. His presence in the forum would have provided additional fodder for Septimus's claims of impropriety. We should return immediately, Valeria decided. The training shouldn't be interrupted for legal matters. Their carriage had just cleared the city gates when a rider overtook them, his horse lathered with exertion. Domina Maxima, the man called. Quintus sends me, There's been an attack at the estate. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Several men lay bound in the courtyard, guards stood at heightened alert, and the training area showed signs of violent struggle. Mercenaries, Quintus reported grimly. 6 of them, disguised as wine merchants. They came armed with more than trading goods. Titus? Valeria asked, scanning the area. Injured but nothing severe. Demetria is tending to him. Quintus's expression darkened. It could have been much worse. They came prepared for killing, not capture. In her father's old study, now converted to a treatment room, Valeria found Titus sitting shirtless on a wooden bench. Demetria applied a poultice to a long cut across his ribs while he winced stoically. Superficial, Demetria assured her. Though he'll have another scar to add to his collection. Leave us, Valeria instructed. When they were alone, she approached Titus, examining the wound with concern. Septimus grows desperate. First poison, now direct assault. The timing suggests he knew of the hearing's outcome before we did, Titus observed. He has informants within the praetor's staff. Or the praetor himself is compromised. Valeria sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed. The political maneuvering, legal battles, and now violence, all cascading from what had begun as a straightforward transaction. Perhaps we should consider Crassus's offer more seriously. Politics makes for unreliable protection, Titus cautioned. Today Crassus opposes Septimus. Tomorrow, if advantageous, they drink as brothers. What alternative do we have? My cousin clearly intends to stop us by any means necessary. Titus rose, testing his bandaged side with careful movements. We accelerate our plans. Move the training to a more secure location. Limit who knows our movements. And the legal requirements? Without proof of my father's debt to you, the citizenship petition fails. Then we focus first on survival and victory, Titus stated pragmatically. Legal rights mean nothing to the dead. That evening, while reviewing household accounts in her chambers, Valeria developed a fierce headache. By midnight, fever gripped her, accompanied by violent chills. Demetria suspected poisoning, perhaps a slow-acting agent in the wine served at the praetor's building. For 3 days, Valeria drifted between consciousness and delirium, attended constantly by Demetria. In her lucid moments, she learned that Titus had taken command of the household security, instituting practices from his arena days, food tasters, rotating guards, and controlled access to all buildings. On the 4th night, her fever broke. She awoke to find Titus seated beside her bed, his expression etched with concern he didn't bother to disguise. You should rest, she murmured, her voice weak. I've rested enough. He offered her water, supporting her head as she drank. Your household needed direction while you recovered. Thank you. The simple words seemed inadequate for the responsibility he had assumed, far beyond their original agreement. In her weakened state, inhibitions loosened by lingering fever, Valeria found herself speaking thoughts normally kept private. My father never spoke of you specifically, but in his final days, he expressed regrets about the games he'd sponsored. Men who died for his entertainment. Titus's expression revealed nothing. Many died in the arena under Maximus' patronage. It was business, nothing personal. He mentioned a fighter forced to combat against his oath. A champion who had earned retirement. She studied Titus's face. Was that you? His silence was answer enough. What happened? She pressed gently. After receiving the rudis, I refused several offers to return to the arena. Your father's Lanista then claimed I remained under contract for one final bout, a private exhibition for select patrons. Titus's voice grew distant with memory. When I refused, there were consequences for friends still bound to the ludus. I fought to protect them. And my father knew this coercion occurred in his name, Valeria concluded, pieces aligning. Hence the debt he acknowledged. Perhaps, though I never saw him personally. Titus rose abruptly. You should rest more. We can discuss this when you're stronger. As he reached the door, Valeria called after him, I'm sorry, Titus, for what was done to you in my family's name. He paused, his back still turned. You are not your father, Valeria. Nor am I the same man who fought that day. Then he was gone, leaving her to wonder which version of himself he meant, the champion who had submitted to coercion, or the slave who had possessed no real choice at all. 3 days after her recovery, Valeria discovered Titus had left the estate before dawn without explanation. Quintus offered only vague reassurances about necessary preparations, leaving her to wonder if their conversation about her father had driven him away permanently. By evening, concern had transformed to quiet anger. Their agreement was contractual, yes, but his departure without word felt like betrayal. A rider approaches, Demetria announced as Valeria picked at her dinner. Moving quickly. Valeria steeled herself for news, perhaps from Marcus about another legal complication, or worse, word that Titus had abandoned their cause entirely. Instead, a household slave appeared at the doorway. Domina, Titus Severus requests your presence at the old temple on the eastern boundary. The Temple of Mercury had fallen into disuse decades earlier, its stone walls crumbling at the edges, roof partially open to the stars. As Valeria approached with 2 guards following at a discreet distance, she saw lamplight flickering within. Titus stood alone in the center of the space, beside him a simple wooden chest. Around his neck hung the iron slave collar he had worn in the ludus, kept all these years as a reminder. You left without word, Valeria said, her tone carefully neutral. I needed to retrieve something. He gestured to the chest. And to think, away from distractions. And have you finished thinking? No, he admitted. But I've remembered something that might help our legal case. He opened the chest and removed a clay tablet wrapped in oiled cloth. This was given to me after that final private bout, payment for my participation. I've never opened it. The tablet bore the Maxima family seal, unbroken after all these years. Valeria took it with reverent care. You kept this, but never learned what it contained? It came from the man who forced me to break my oath. I wanted nothing from him. With trembling fingers, Valeria broke the seal. Inside lay a legal document, a declaration freeing 5 specific gladiators from the ludus that had housed Titus, all men she now recognized as his closest friends from arena days. Among them Quintus. He freed your friends, she whispered, after forcing you to fight. Guilt, perhaps, Titus suggested. Or calculated manipulation, giving just enough to prevent a scandal if I spoke publicly about the coercion. This proves the connection between you and my father. The debt he referenced in his will. She looked up from the document. But why keep this if you resented him so deeply? Titus turned the iron collar in his hands. I keep reminders of both freedom and bondage. To forget either is dangerous. In the dim lamplight, surrounded by crumbling temple walls, the distance between patrician woman and former slave seemed simultaneously vast and insignificant. Valeria stepped closer. Is that why you left today? To decide whether this agreement between us is simply another form of bondage. I left because I needed to remember who I was before the arena, before Rome. His voice grew softer. Before you. The admission hung in the air between them, neither able to retreat from its implications. And who were you? She asked finally. A Thracian with a different name. A tribesman who valued honor above life. His gaze held hers. A man who would never have imagined standing as an equal before a Roman noblewoman. Are we equals, Titus? Truly. Valeria gestured to the world beyond the temple walls. Rome would say otherwise. Rome says many things. Most of them designed to maintain power for those who already possess it. He set down the collar. What do you say, Valeria Maxima? Are we equals? She considered his question with the seriousness it deserved. In worth? Without question. In circumstance? Rome has granted me privileges by birth that you earned through blood and suffering. An honest answer. He nodded appreciatively. Now I have another question. When this is finished, the game's won, your inheritance secured, my obligation fulfilled, what then? The question caught her unprepared. She had focused so intently on immediate survival that the future beyond remained unexamined. I don't know, she admitted. Political marriage remains the expected path for a woman of my station. Crassus has already made overtures. And is that what you want? A political alliance? Children raised to play the same games that nearly destroyed your family? What alternative exists? She challenged. What future could you and I possibly? She stopped, suddenly aware of the implication in her own words. Titus stepped closer, close enough that propriety demanded retreat. Valeria remained still. That is what I needed to determine, he said quietly. Whether what grows between us is real or merely the product of our unusual circumstances. And your conclusion? Instead of answering, he reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw. When she didn't, his hand gently cupped her cheek, thumb brushing her lower lip with unexpected tenderness. The kiss that followed was hesitant at first, a question rather than a demand. When she responded, stepping into his embrace, the restraint between them dissolved like morning mist under the Roman sun. They separated breathlessly, both aware of boundaries irrevocably crossed. We should return to the estate, Valeria said, though she made no move to increase the distance between them. Separately, there are still appearances to maintain. For now, Titus agreed, reluctantly releasing her. But we should be clear about what we're fighting for. Is it just your inheritance and my citizenship? Or something neither of us anticipated? Both, she answered simply. All of it. We'll find a way. As she turned to leave, Titus called after her, Valeria, I would have honored our agreement regardless. This changes nothing about my obligation. She looked back, allowing herself a genuine smile. It changes everything, Titus. But perhaps that's as it should be. The map spread across Valeria's desk revealed the Circus Maximus in meticulous detail, seating arrangements, entrances, underground passages, and most critically, marked positions where Septimus had stationed men for the day of the games. Marcus Tullius had acquired it from a source within the aedile's office, paying handsomely for information that confirmed their worst fears. Assassins, Quintus said bluntly, pointing to several marked locations. Positioned to ensure Titus never leaves the arena alive, regardless of the match outcome. Titus studied the markings with professional detachment. Expected. Septimus can't risk my victory. It's worse than that, Marcus added gravely. My sources indicate this extends beyond your inheritance dispute, Valeria. Septimus has aligned himself with a faction opposing Crassus. They're using the games as cover for eliminating several political rivals. Valeria felt cold dread settle in her stomach. A purge, disguised as entertainment. Precisely. The deaths will appear as unfortunate accidents amid the chaos of the games. Marcus indicated several patrician seating sections. These marked areas contain Crassus's allies. Your cousin has turned a family matter into a factional conflict. The room fell silent as they absorbed the implications. What had begun as a contest for inheritance had escalated into a dangerous political scheme that threatened lives beyond their own. We should alert Crassus, Valeria suggested. His influence could. Already done, Marcus interrupted. I sent a trusted messenger this morning with copies of this evidence. Then we adapt our strategy, Titus said decisively. The arena I can handle. These external threats require additional preparation. Over the next several hours, they formulated contingencies. Loyal household guards would be strategically positioned throughout the venue. Escape routes were established. Messages were prepared for trusted allies in the city, to be delivered only if necessary. And Corvus? Valeria asked finally. What do we know of him? Little, Quintus admitted. He appeared in Sicily last year, fought 6 matches with 6 deaths. No clear fighting style, he adapts to each opponent. Some say he was trained outside the traditional Ludus system. An assassin using the arena as his stage, Titus concluded. Likely chosen specifically for me. As evening approached, they separated to attend to individual preparations. Valeria found Titus later in the small garden that had become their customary meeting place. The 7 weeks of training had transformed him physically. He was leaner, harder, his movements more precise than when they'd first met. Are you concerned about Corvus? She asked, joining him on the stone bench. No. Arena combat, I understand. It's the politics surrounding it that pose the greater threat. He looked troubled. You should reconsider attending. Send a representative instead. Impossible. As sponsor, my absence would be noted immediately. Septimus wouldn't hesitate to include you in his plans if it served his purpose. Valeria touched his arm gently. I'm a Maxima. We don't hide from threats. They sat in companionable silence as twilight deepened around them, the enormity of what lay ahead giving weight to the moment. If something happens to me, Titus said finally, Quintus knows what to do. He'll ensure your safety. Nothing will happen to you, she replied with more confidence than she felt. We've prepared for every contingency. In the arena, preparation helps, but fate often intervenes. He turned to face her directly. Before we're surrounded by chaos and politics, I want clarity between us. What began as transaction has become something else. Valeria felt her heart quicken. Since their encounter at the abandoned temple, they had maintained proper distance in public while exchanging private moments of increasing intimacy. Neither had spoken directly of the future. Something impossible, she acknowledged softly. A patrician woman and a former gladiator. Rome has overcome greater impossibilities. His hand found hers in the gathering darkness. If we survive this, I intend to pursue whatever path allows us to remain together, whether in Rome or beyond its borders. My family name, my inheritance, my position, all of it bound to Rome, Valeria reminded him. Could you accept life within a system that once enslaved you? I would accept it for you, he said simply, though I think you underestimate your capacity for reinvention. The night before the games, neither slept well. Final preparations consumed the hours until dawn, weapons checked, arrangements confirmed, contingencies reviewed. As the first light broke over the eastern hills, Valeria stood at her window watching Titus in the courtyard below, moving through practice forms with fluid precision. Demetria entered quietly with a silver cup. Calming tea, Domin. For your nerves. Are they so obvious? Valeria accepted the drink gratefully. Only to those who know you well. The Greek woman's eyes held understanding beyond her station. The games approach, and with them, great change, regardless of outcome. You disapprove of my feelings for him. I served your mother before you, watched you grow from child to woman. My approval or disapproval matters little. Demetria straightened Valeria's morning stola with practiced hands. But I know this. Your father married for political advantage and found little joy in it. Perhaps happiness deserves the same consideration as duty. Later, as their small entourage prepared to depart for Rome, Titus approached Valeria privately, presenting her with a small leather pouch. A tradition among Thracian warriors, he explained. Before battle, we carry something precious from one we would protect. Inside lay a simple copper disc, etched with unfamiliar symbols. What does it mean? It bears my true name, the one given by my mother before Rome renamed me. Keep it today. Its return to me after victory will complete the cycle. The gesture moved her deeply. In response, she removed a silver ring bearing her family's crest. Then take this, so you carry the Maxima name into battle, not as obligation but as choice. Rome transformed during the Games of Apollo, its streets thronging with visitors from throughout Italy. Vendors hawked everything from religious tokens to meat pies, while performers competed for attention at every corner. The festival atmosphere belied the deadly spectacles at its center: chariot races, animal hunts, and gladiatorial combat. The Circus Maximus loomed ahead as Valeria's carriage approached through crowded streets. Though smaller than the Colosseum, its oval arena provided ample space for the day's entertainment. Already the stands filled with spectators, from slaves crowded on upper wooden benches to senators reclining in cushioned boxes. Remember, Marcus Tullius cautioned as their carriage stopped near the sponsor's entrance, maintain dignified presence throughout. As your father's representative, every eye will judge your composure. Valeria nodded, smoothing her formal stola, deep blue with subtle gold embroidery, conservative yet unmistakably patrician. The copper disc Titus had given her remained hidden in a small pouch at her waist, a secret talisman against the dangers ahead. Her entrance drew immediate attention. The sponsor's box positioned her prominently among Rome's elite, where she would be visible to all, including Septimus, who occupied a space nearby with his political allies. He acknowledged her with a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "Cousin," he greeted her with false warmth. "How brave of you to attend personally. These events can become so unpredictable." "The Maxima family has never shied from public duty," she replied evenly. "Father would expect nothing less." "Indeed. He was always concerned with appearances." Septimus's gaze flicked meaningfully toward the gladiator preparation area below. "Speaking of appearances, your investment has caused quite the stir. Titus Severus returning after a decade. People wonder what persuaded him to break such a famous oath. Perhaps principles matter more to him than gossip." Valeria maintained her composed expression. "Some oaths transcend others." Before Septimus could respond, trumpets announced the commencement of the games. The procession began, standard bearers, musicians, and finally the gladiators themselves, parading before the assembled crowd. Each fighter wore ceremonial armor more elaborate than combat gear, designed to impress rather than protect. Titus appeared last, his entrance producing a wave of recognition through the audience. Many present had witnessed his fights years ago, others knew him only by reputation. The legendary scar across his face caught the sunlight as he walked with measured dignity, neither playing to the crowd nor avoiding their gaze. The ceremonial armor crafted for his return incorporated elements of his Thracian heritage, silver embossing on the shoulder guards, symbolic patterns etched into the breastplate. Unlike younger fighters who preened and posed, Titus simply stood at attention during the introductions, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Ave Imperator, morituri de salutant." The traditional gladiators' salute echoed across the arena, though Titus's lips barely moved during the recitation. The irony wasn't lost on Valeria, men about to die saluting the glory of Rome, a city built on conquest and maintained through spectacle. The early matches proceeded according to tradition. A venatio featuring exotic beasts from Africa. Chariot demonstrations. Several preliminary gladiatorial bouts that ended with minor injuries rather than deaths, the crowd saving their bloodlust for the main attractions. Throughout, Valeria maintained careful awareness of her surroundings. Crassus had arrived with an unusually large entourage, his guards positioned strategically throughout the venue. Clearly, he had taken their warning seriously. She noted several men whose posture and alertness marked them as Septimus's plants rather than ordinary spectators, their positions matching the map Marcus had acquired. A messenger appeared at her elbow during a brief intermission. "From Senator Crassus," the young man murmured, presenting a sealed note. The message was terse, *, proceed as planned. "My men are in position. The praetor has been secured, *. One small victory at least. If the praetor responsible for legal oversight remained free from Septimus's influence, their chances improved significantly. Below in the hypogeum, the underground chambers where gladiators prepared, Titus methodically checked his combat equipment. Unlike the ceremonial armor of the procession, his fighting gear prioritized mobility over display. The Thracian style favored speed and precision rather than heavy protection. Corvus arrived with private guards, Quintus reported, joining him in the cramped preparation space. 6 men, heavily armed. "They're keeping everyone away from him." "Expected," Titus replied, testing the edge of his sword with his thumb. "What else?" He requested specific modifications to his equipment. Unusual spikes on his shield rim. The Lannister allowed it. Quintus lowered his voice. "And there's talk of poison. His blade may be treated." Titus nodded grimly. "Then I'll avoid being cut." "The arena's been designed with restricted movement in mind," Quintus continued. "They've placed obstacles favoring his fighting style, walls for ambush, limited escape routes." "The arena was always a rigged game," Titus replied with grim humor. "This simply makes the manipulation more obvious." A horn sounded, signaling the approach of the main event. Titus rose, rolling his shoulders to settle the familiar weight of armor. "If I fall," he said quietly, "get Valeria out immediately. Septimus won't hesitate once I'm eliminated." "You won't fall." Quintus gripped his forearm in the gladiator's salute. "But I'll protect her with my life if necessary." As Titus prepared to enter the arena, an arena slave approached with a message scroll. "From your patrona," the boy whispered, clearly paid to deliver this unauthorized communication. The note contained only 5 words in Valeria's elegant script. "Remember why you're fighting. Return." Sand crunched beneath Titus's feet as he entered the arena, the familiar sensation triggering memories long suppressed. The roar of the crowd washed over him, a sound once as natural as his own heartbeat, now almost overwhelming after years of quiet country life. He allowed himself one brief glance toward Valeria in the sponsor's box before focusing entirely on the task at hand. Opposite him, a gate opened to reveal his opponent. Corvus emerged like a creature from underworld mythology, lean and predatory in black armor adorned with raven feathers. His face remained obscured behind a helmet with an elongated faceplate shaped like a bird's beak. Only his eyes were visible, cold and calculating as they assessed Titus. The contrast between them was immediately apparent. Titus embodied the classical gladiator tradition, disciplined, straightforward, his movements efficient and controlled. Corvus prowled the arena's edge with theatrical menace, playing to the crowd's expectations of the mysterious assassin. The lanista overseeing the match raised his "Begin." Neither man rushed forward. They circled cautiously, each assessing the other's movements, searching for patterns and weaknesses. Titus noted how Corvus favored his right leg slightly, a potential vulnerability. Corvus seemed to be gauging Titus's speed, testing reactions with subtle feints. "The great Thracian," Corvus finally spoke, his voice muffled behind his mask. "Legend says you killed 100 men. Yet you look ordinary." Titus didn't respond to the provocation. Conversation was a distraction, a technique used to break concentration. Instead, he maintained focus, watching for the telltale tension that would precede a real attack. It came suddenly, Corvus lunging forward with unexpected speed, his blade slicing toward Titus's neck. Titus parried and countered, but Corvus was already spinning away, the spiked rim of his shield leaving a shallow cut across Titus's forearm. The crowd roared its approval of first blood. In the sponsor's box, Valeria maintained her composed expression through sheer will, though her fingers clutched the copper disc hidden in her pouch. Titus felt the familiar rhythm of combat returning, the heightened awareness, the calculation of distance and timing. But something was wrong. His reaction seemed sluggish, his vision occasionally blurring at the edges. The minor wound on his arm burned unnaturally. Poison, he realized, confirming Quintus's warning. Not deadly, that would be too obvious, but something to slow reflexes and dull senses. Enough to ensure defeat without appearing deliberate. Corvus pressed his advantage, launching a series of aggressive combinations that forced Titus into defensive positions. The younger fighter moved with fluid grace, each attack flowing seamlessly into the next. The crowd began to murmur with disappointment. The legendary Thracian was being outclassed. In the stands, Septimus leaned toward his companions with a satisfied smile. "Age catches all men eventually," he commented loudly enough for Valeria to hear. "Even legends." Valeria said nothing, her attention fixed on Titus as he absorbed another glancing blow. His movements seemed increasingly labored, his counterattacks lacking their earlier precision. Something was clearly wrong. Down in the arena, Titus fought through waves of disorientation. The training of decades past provided muscle memory his clouded mind couldn't, allowing basic defense even as strategy became difficult to maintain. He retreated toward one of the arena walls, seemingly cornered. Corvus advanced confidently, certain of his imminent victory. "Nothing personal," he said quietly as he closed in. "Just business." The assassin lunged for what should have been the killing stroke, but Titus had been anticipating this moment. Using the wall for support, he sidestepped with surprising speed and caught Corvus's weapon arm. The momentum carried them both to the ground in a cloud of sand. They grappled briefly before separating, each regaining their feet. The crowd, previously disappointed, now leaned forward with renewed interest. Blood ran freely down Titus's arm, and his breathing came in labored gasps, but his eyes had cleared with the surge of combat adrenaline. "Septimus promised you wealth for this kill?" Titus asked, circling more cautiously now. Corvus tilted his head, bird-like behind his mask. "Enough to retire comfortably. Nothing compared to what he gains." "And if you fail?" "I don't fail." The confidence in Corvus's voice was absolute. In the sponsor's box, Valeria noticed subtle movements among the crowd, Septimus's men shifting into secondary positions, Crassus's guards responding in kind. The larger plot was advancing regardless of the combat outcome. Below, Titus had begun fighting differently, no longer attempting to match Corvus's speed and agility, but instead employing economy of movement, letting the younger fighter expend energy on elaborate attacks while conserving his own strength. "He's adapting," Marcus Tullius observed quietly beside Valeria, "drawing on experience over raw ability." Indeed, Titus had recognized his disadvantage and changed tactics accordingly. Where Corvus fought with the arrogance of youth and unbroken victory, Titus brought the hard-earned wisdom of 100 arena battles. He began predicting attack patterns, positioning himself to minimize effort while maximizing effect. A subtle shift occurred in the crowd's energy as they recognized the strategic battle unfolding. This was no longer merely spectacle but a contest of skill versus strength, experience versus youth. Even those who had come for blood found themselves appreciating the display of tactical fighting. Corvus, sensing the changing dynamics, grew more aggressive. His attacks became wilder, abandoning some precision for increased power. Titus weathered the assault, waiting for the opportunity that inevitably comes when aggression overreaches itself. It arrived in the form of an overextended thrust. Titus sidestepped, trapped Corvus's arm, and delivered a powerful blow to the assassin's helmet, denting the metal and staggering the younger fighter. For the first time, Corvus appeared vulnerable, blood and sand mingled beneath their feet as Titus pressed his advantage. The crowd sensed the turning tide, their cheers growing louder with each exchange. Corvus had lost his earlier fluid grace, his movements now desperate and reactive rather than controlled. Titus advanced methodically, his decades of arena experience evident in how he controlled space and dictated the rhythm of combat. Though the poison still clouded his senses, adrenaline and focus kept him functioning. He had survived worse conditions in his fighting days. "You rely too much on your youth," Titus said during a brief moment when they circled each other. "Speed fades. Technique endures." Corvus responded with a snarling attack, his shield-spiked edge sweeping toward Titus's face. Titus caught the blow on his own shield, the impact shuddering through his arm. The wood cracked, sabotage, likely, splitting down the center and leaving him with only a fractured remnant for protection. In the stands, Valeria gripped the edge of her seat, maintaining outward composure while her heart raced. Beside her, Marcus leaned closer. "Septimus's men are moving," he whispered. "3 approaching the lower corridor beneath us." Valeria nodded almost imperceptibly. "Crassus knows. His guards are responding. But our focus must remain on Titus. Without his victory, all other plans become irrelevant." Down in the arena, Titus discarded his broken shield, adjusting his stance for single-weapon fighting. The crowd murmured with anticipation. A gladiator without shield became both more vulnerable and more dangerous, forced to rely entirely on offensive capability. Corvus, sensing opportunity, launched a series of brutal attacks. Titus evaded most but took a glancing blow across his shoulder, opening an other wound. The poison would enter there too, further weakening him. "You fought well, old man," Corvus taunted, circling for the kill. "But legends should remain in the past where they belong." Titus didn't waste breath on response. Instead, he centered himself, calling upon techniques rarely seen in the arena, movements learned in his homeland long before Rome had taken him. The Thracian fighting arts were older than Rome itself, passed through generations of tribal warriors. What happened next stunned the audience into momentary silence. Titus's sword became a blur as he executed a complex attack pattern, his movements suddenly fluid and unpredictable. Corvus retreated in confusion, his confidence visibly shaken by this unexpected shift. "The Thracian moon dance," an old senator murmured in recognition. "I haven't seen that technique in 30 years. Titus pressed forward relentlessly, his blade finding gaps in Corvus's defense that should not have existed. A cut to the thigh. A slash across the forearm. Each wound precisely placed to hamper movement without being immediately fatal. Corvus fought back with increasing desperation, abandoning technique for raw aggression. During one exchange, his blade caught Titus across the ribs, breaking through armor to slice flesh. Titus staggered but didn't fall. In that moment of vulnerability, Corvus committed fully to what should have been the killing blow, a direct thrust toward Titus's exposed chest. But the veteran gladiator had anticipated this, had indeed invited it through his apparent weakness. With a move that defied his age and condition, Titus pivoted away from the thrust while simultaneously striking downward with his own blade. The gladius connected with Corvus's wrist with surgical precision, severing tendons and sending the younger fighter's weapon spinning away across the sand. The crowd erupted in approval. Corvus dropped to his knees, disarmed and defeated. Tradition demanded he now look to the editor of the games for judgment, life or death determined by the crowd's whim and official decree. Titus stood over his fallen opponent, breathing heavily, blood seeping from multiple wounds. He raised his sword but waited, adhering to the ritual that had governed his life for so many years. In the stands, the crowd's attention turned to Valeria as Titus's sponsor. The gesture for mercy or death would traditionally come from her position. Septimus watched her intently, clearly expecting, perhaps hoping, she would choose death and make Titus break his decade-old oath. Valeria stood, her expression resolute. The copper disc pressed against her palm as she extended her hand, thumb horizontal, then deliberately turning upward in the signal for mercy. Her voice carried clearly, "Honor is satisfied without blood. Let him live." Murmurs rippled through the audience, some approving, others disappointed at being denied the spectacle of death. Titus lowered his sword, honoring his patron's decision. What happened next occurred with such speed that many would later debate the sequence of events. Corvus, seemingly accepting defeat, suddenly produced a hidden dagger from his armor. As he lunged toward Titus's exposed side, the veteran fighter reacted instinctively, pivoting away while his sword moved in a defensive arc. The blade connected with Corvus's neck just below the helmet. The assassin collapsed forward, blood pouring onto the sand as his final treachery failed. Titus stood motionless, staring at his bloodied sword. 10 years of oath-keeping, undone in a moment of self-preservation. The crowd roared its approval, mistaking his stillness for the stoic pose of a champion. Only Valeria recognized the conflict in his rigid posture. Though legally and morally justified, he had killed again. The oath was broken. Titus knelt in the sand beside his fallen opponent, sword planted before him in the traditional victor's pose. The arena physician confirmed what everyone already knew. Corvus was beyond help, his life emptied onto the bloodied sand. Following protocol, arena attendants carried away the body while others raked clean the evidence of combat. The crowd continued its enthusiastic approval, many standing to honor the return of a legend. Titus remained motionless, his expression unreadable behind the mask of blood, sweat, and exhaustion. Only when the lanista approached to formally declare him victor did he finally rise, accepting the ceremonial victory laurel with stoic dignity. In the stands, Valeria had barely begun to process their victory when Marcus gripped her arm in warning. "Septimus is making his move," he whispered urgently. "His men have surrounded the exit corridors." Indeed, her cousin had risen from his seat and was now conferring intensely with several hard-faced men in plain tunics, the type of hired muscle that executed Rome's less savory political maneuvers. Though the crowd's attention remained on the arena, something dangerous was unfolding in the periphery. "Crassus?" she asked, scanning the nearby boxes. Moving to intercept, but too slowly. Marcus gestured discreetly toward a side passage. "We need to reach Titus before he's isolated in the holding area." Septimus won't allow him to leave alive, not after this public defeat. They moved quickly but without obvious haste, navigating through the crowded stands toward the gladiator's exit. Halfway there, two of Septimus's men stepped into their path. Before either could speak, a commanding voice interrupted from behind. "Ah, Valeria Maxima." Senator Crassus appeared with perfect timing, flanked by his personal guards. "Magnificent sponsorship. Your father would be proud. You must join me to receive the official victory recognition." The implied order was clear to everyone present. Septimus's men hesitated, unwilling to act against Rome's wealthiest man in public. Crassus escorted Valeria smoothly past them, his guards creating a protective barrier. "Your cousin moves with desperation rather than strategy," Crassus observed quietly. "A dangerous combination." "Titus," Valeria began, "is being secured by my people," Crassus assured her. "Though his injuries require immediate attention. The physician reports possible poisoning." They reached the holding area beneath the stands where victorious gladiators were traditionally honored before returning to their quarters. Titus sat on a stone bench while a physician examined his wounds, his armor removed to reveal multiple lacerations. Despite his pallor and obvious exhaustion, he straightened when Valeria entered. "My patron honors me," he said formally, adhering to protocol despite the extraordinary circumstances. "The honor is Rome's, to witness the return of its greatest champion," she replied, completing the ritual exchange before turning to the physician. "His condition?" "Multiple lacerations, evidence of a slow-acting toxin," the man reported. "Serious but not immediately life-threatening with proper treatment." Crassus's steward approached with urgent news. Septimus had publicly contested the match results, claiming irregularities in equipment and procedure. While legally meaningless, the victory was already recorded. It created confusion that would serve his broader purposes. "We need to move quickly," Crassus decided. "My villa is prepared to receive you both until matters calm. The streets aren't safe." The journey through Rome became a tense exercise in vigilance. Crassus's men formed a protective detail around their carriage, watchful for ambush in the narrow streets. Titus, wrapped in a clean tunic and cloak, sat upright through sheer will despite his injuries. Valeria maintained a careful distance within the carriage, propriety still necessary despite all they had endured together. "Your victory secures your inheritance," Marcus informed her as they traveled. "I've already dispatched messengers to the praetor's office with the official results. By law, your father's will conditions are satisfied." "And the citizenship petition?" Titus asked, his voice strained but clear. "In progress, though complicated by today's events." Marcus looked troubled. "Septimus will attack from multiple angles now, legal challenges, perhaps even accusations of improper influence over the games." "Let him," Valeria said with quiet confidence. "The victory stands. The public witnessed it. Even in Rome, some facts cannot be manipulated." Crassus's villa provided temporary sanctuary, guards at every entrance, a private physician for Titus, and the political protection of Rome's most powerful private citizen. As evening fell, Valeria stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the sounds of continued festival celebration rising from distant streets. Titus joined her there, moving stiffly but with determination. The physician's treatments had reduced the poison's effects, though recovery would take time. "You shouldn't be walking yet," she admonished gently. "I've had worse," he replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. "We should discuss what happens now." "Now," she said, "you focus on healing. I secure my inheritance and fulfill my obligations to you and Quintus. The legal process for citizenship." "That's not what I meant," Titus interrupted. His hand found hers in the gathering darkness. "Today in the arena, when forced to kill despite my oath, I realized something. Some vows matter more than others." He placed the victory laurel, the traditional crown given to arena champions, in her hands. "In my homeland, warriors present these to those they pledge themselves to. Not as slave to master, but as equal to equal." The gesture held profound significance, rejecting the symbolism of Rome's arena culture and replacing it with something more personal, more meaningful. Dawn had barely broken when the attack came. Septimus, desperate after his public humiliation, had gathered mercenaries rather than waiting for legal maneuvers. They struck from multiple angles, scaling garden walls, bribing servants for access, creating diversions at the main gate. To the secure room, Crassus's steward directed as guards rushed to defensive positions. Senator Crassus established protocols for such emergencies. But Titus had different instincts. Too predictable, he countered. If they've planned this assault, they'll know about secure locations. We need mobility, not fortress thinking. Valeria nodded in agreement. Is there another way out? Something servants might use? The kitchen passages provided their escape route, narrow corridors designed for slaves to move throughout the villa unseen by noble guests. As sounds of fighting echoed behind them, they emerged into a small courtyard normally used for deliveries. Quintus awaited them there with horses, always planning for worse scenarios. He had positioned himself outside the villa rather than relying on its defenses. The city gates will be watched, he reported. Septimus has paid urban cohort officers to detain you if seen. Then we avoid the gates, Titus decided, helping Valeria mount despite his own injuries. The old aqueduct maintenance tunnels near the eastern wall, they're rarely guarded. They rode through back streets and alleyways, avoiding main thoroughfares where festival crowds would attract official attention. Rome's labyrinthine layout, normally a frustration for visitors, now provided perfect cover for their escape. Near the eastern wall, they abandoned their horses and proceeded on foot, Titus leading them to an inconspicuous archway half hidden by overgrown vegetation. The tunnel beyond was damp and narrow, requiring them to proceed single file through darkness broken only by the occasional shaft of light from maintenance openings above. How did you know of this place? Valeria asked as they carefully navigated the slippery stone pathway. In my early days as a gladiator, I planned escapes, Titus admitted. Memorized every potential route from the city. I never used them, but the knowledge remained. They emerged outside the city walls as horns sounded from nearby guard towers. The alarm for their escape had finally been raised. Without pausing, they continued toward the countryside, making for the relative safety of Valeria's estate. Upon arrival, they found chaos. Septimus had sent men ahead, anticipating their destination. The main villa showed signs of forced entry, smoke rising from one wing where fires had been set. Demetria, Valeria gasped, fear gripping her heart at the thought of her loyal servant caught in the violence. They approached cautiously, using the olive groves for cover. As they neared, a group of household slaves emerged from a hidden cellar entrance, Demetria among them, directing the others with calm efficiency. Domina! Relief flooded the Greek woman's face upon seeing Valeria. We received warning just before they arrived. Marcus Tullius sent a messenger. The attackers? Gone for now. They searched the villa, took some valuables, then set fires before departing. They seemed more interested in finding something specific than causing complete destruction. The contract, Titus realized. And the evidence of your father's connection to me. Valeria nodded grimly. Septimus seeks to destroy our legal foundation before the citizenship petition can proceed. Inside the damaged villa, they assessed the situation. Most of the fires had been contained by quick-thinking servants, though the eastern wing had suffered significant damage. Valuables had been stolen, silver plates, jewelry, decorative items, but the true target was clearly Valeria's study, where documents were scattered and cabinet locks broken. The contract is safe, Marcus Tullius assured them, having arrived from the city with additional guards. I anticipated such a move and secured the original with the temple vestals after witnessing its signing. Not even a consul can demand documents from their keeping. Titus inspected the estate's defenses, directing servants to reinforce vulnerable points. Despite his injuries, he moved with purpose. The tactical mind that had survived 100 arena battles now focused on protecting this small domain. As evening approached, they gathered in the partially damaged atrium to assess their position. The family signet ring, one of the few items Septimus's men had overlooked, lay on the table between them, a symbol of legitimacy amid the chaos. Septimus grows more desperate, Marcus observed. These tactics will ultimately undermine his position with the Senate. Violence against a patrician household, even in a family dispute, crosses boundaries most nobles consider inviolable. We should use this, Valeria decided, sliding the signet ring onto her finger, the first time she had claimed this symbol of family authority. Tomorrow I'll appear before the Senate, publicly demand justice, and formally present our petition while Septimus's actions are fresh in everyone's mind. Too dangerous, Titus objected. He'll have men waiting. Which is why you'll remain here, she countered. You're still recovering, and your presence would complicate the political narrative. This part of the battle requires patrician politics, not arena tactics. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, not from Rome, but from a nearby estate belonging to Crassus. The senator had escaped the attack on his villa and relocated, maintaining his support despite the escalating situation. He offers a formal escort for your Senate appearance, the messenger reported. And information. Septimus has been summoned before the consuls to explain his actions. Several senators witnessed the attack on Crassus's property, an unforgivable breach of noble courtesy. Valeria smiled for the first time since their escape. Politics turns against my cousin. Now we press our advantage. Later, as plans were finalized for the next day's crucial Senate appearance, Titus found Valeria alone in the garden, contemplating the damaged estate in the moonlight. You should rest, he said, joining her beneath a partially burned trellis. Tomorrow requires all your strength. As should you, she replied, noting how he still favored his injured side. Yet here we both stand, too restless for wisdom. 3 months after the games of Apollo, the gardens of the Maxima estate bloomed with spring flowers. Renovations had erased most evidence of Septimus's attack, though certain architectural changes, additional security features disguised as decorative elements, remained as subtle reminders of lessons learned. Valeria stood beneath a flowering pear tree, watching servants prepare for the evening ceremony. The unprecedented marriage contract lay on her desk inside, bearing the seals of 2 praetors, a consul, and several noble witnesses. Its creation had required legal innovation, political maneuvering, and the personal intervention of Crassus, whose support had proven invaluable in the aftermath of Septimus's failed violence. Everything proceeds according to plan, Domina, Demetria reported, approaching with a formal stola draped over her arm, not the traditional white of Roman brides, but a deep blue embroidered with silver, honoring both Roman tradition and Thracian heritage. And our guests? Valeria asked, accepting the garment. Arriving steadily. Senator Crassus already awaits in the atrium. Several other senators have sent representatives rather than attending personally. Demetria's expression revealed her understanding of this political compromise, support without full public endorsement. Septimus himself was absent from Rome, having retreated to distant family properties after his disgrace in the Senate. His violent tactics had backfired spectacularly, turning potential allies against him when Valeria had appeared before the Senate, dignified and resolute despite visible damage to her household. His legal challenges to her inheritance had been dismissed, his political standing severely diminished. In a private chamber on the opposite side of the villa, Titus adjusted the formal toga that marked his new status. The citizenship ceremony had occurred the previous day in the Forum, both he and Quintus receiving the full legal rights of Roman citizens, their military service requirement waived in recognition of their contributions to Roman society. The official language had been carefully crafted to transform arena combat into honorable service, allowing the Senate to maintain precedent while accommodating this extraordinary case. Still not comfortable in that, are you? Quintus observed with amusement, himself wearing a new toga that indicated his citizenship. I preferred armor, Titus admitted, struggling with the ceremonial draping. Simpler to understand its purpose. Yet you fought your greatest battle without it, his friend noted. In the Senate chamber, allowing her to speak for both of you while you remained silent. That restraint won more support than any display of strength could have. Titus nodded, acknowledging the truth in this observation. The political victory had required different tactics than arena combat: patience, strategic silence, and trust in Valeria's understanding of patrician politics. As sunset approached, guests gathered in the central garden where arrangements combined Roman marriage traditions with subtle elements of Thracian ceremony. No formal priest presided, another compromise that allowed the event to occur without official religious sanction that might have been withheld. Crassus himself had suggested this approach, his pragmatic understanding of Roman politics providing the path of least resistance. Society eventually accepts what it cannot prevent, he had advised. Give them time to adjust rather than demanding immediate approval. When Valeria and Titus met before their assembled guests, the traditional words were exchanged with slight but significant modifications. She did not promise the usual obedience expected of Roman wives. He did not claim the typical authority of Roman husbands. Instead, they pledged mutual respect and protection, acknowledging their unusual path to this moment. The marriage contract incorporated elements never before combined in Roman law: provisions from patrician marriage traditions, freedmen's legal rights, and even aspects of provincial customs from Titus's homeland. Future legal scholars would study it as precedent for generations, though none present could have predicted its lasting influence. As twilight deepened into evening, lanterns illuminated the celebration. Music from both Roman and Thracian instruments created a unique harmony that symbolized their union. Crassus raised a toast that carefully balanced political astuteness with genuine support, public enough to confer legitimacy, measured enough to protect his own standing. Later, guests had departed and household slaves quietly restored order to the celebration space. Valeria and Titus stood together on the villa's western portico. The lights of Rome glimmered in the distance. The eternal city that had first enslaved him, then reluctantly accepted their unprecedented union. "What are you thinking?" Valeria asked, noting his contemplative expression. "About circles," Titus replied. "I entered Rome in chains, fought for my freedom in its arena, and now stand here as citizen and husband to a patrician woman. The journey seems impossible, yet here we are." "And our next journey?" She gestured toward the eastern horizon, where dawn would eventually reveal the distant hills. "You spoke of visiting your homeland." "Soon." He took her hand, the gesture still novel in its simple freedom. "Though Rome remains our foundation for better or worse. Your inheritance, your position, they're part of who you are. As your homeland is part of you," she acknowledged. "Perhaps our children will understand both worlds in ways neither Rome nor Thrace ever could alone." The mention of children, their future suddenly tangible in a way it hadn't been during their struggle for survival, brought a new dimension to their shared gaze. What had begun as transaction had transformed through combat, politics, and genuine feeling into something Roman law had never anticipated: a marriage of equals, forged through challenge rather than arrangement. From arena sand to this, Titus marveled quietly. "Who could have imagined it?" "I did," Valeria replied with certainty. "From the moment you agreed to fight, I began to see possibilities beyond the immediate victory." As they turned to enter their shared home, the distant sounds of Rome's nightlife carried on the breeze, a reminder of the city that had both united and divided them, and which they had ultimately transformed through their defiance of its rigid boundaries.